Today we're going to be looking at a car which I consider to be quite simply one of the most important vehicles we ever designed and built right here in Australia. It's the Ford BA Falcon.
Today we're going back 21 years to the dawn of the new millennium. Sydney played host to the Summer Olympics, John Howard introduced the GST, and our jaws hit the floor playing the latest games on their new PlayStation 2. The Holden vs Ford battle was also in full swing, with the new generation Commodore going head to head with the latest Falcon. The conservatively styled VT Commodore left the gates first, winning the hearts and minds of the Australian public, a full 12 months before Ford dragged their radical new AU Falcon out from behind the back shed, and then backed away nervously with their hands in the air. To say the AU Falcon was received poorly would be an understatement. It wasn't a bad car per se, in fact, it was the best Falcon ever made, and by a long shot too. But punters rejected its new age styling and sales took a dive right down to levels not seen since the early 1990s. With the Falcon on the way down, Commodore sales reached near stratospheric levels, outselling the AU Falcon 2-1 and cementing its place in history as the best-selling Commodore ever. Ford had to do something and do it fast. They wheeled out the AU Falcon Series 2 and 3 as stopgap measures, refining the design and tarting up the AU as best they could. But in the background they were working frantically on a full-blown replacement, and in late 2002 the BA Falcon finally hit the market. The remnants of the AU were still there in the roofline and the doors, but it was masked by modern, contemporary styling. With the BA Falcon, Ford went all out, $500 million invested, 24,000 hours of engine and durability testing, and a trip to the Nürburgring to ensure that the suspension could match Europe's best. And you know what? It bloody well worked. The BA was an absolute blinder. Aussies came flooding back to Ford dealerships across the country and the sales turned around. And once again we had a proper Ford versus Holden battle on our hands. Two cars for which we could all be very proud of. But was the BA Falcon really that good? Or did the AU simply set the bar for success too low?
Now look, I might be completely biased, I'll be the first to admit that, but I think the BA Falcon is a bloody ripper of a thing. For a car that started out essentially as an AU Falcon, somehow Ford were able to come up with a design which looks completely resolved. I mean, sure, if you look at the center section here, the doors, the windows, the roofline, you can see that AU Falcon trapped inside just waiting to get out. But really, everything else here looks just right. Ford did cut a couple of corners here or there, quite literally. I mean, have a look at how they've squared off the AU Falcon's rounded windscreen edges. Looks good, yeah? Modern, classy, ticks all of the boxes. But if you have a look at it from the inside, they haven't changed a bloody thing. But let's gloss over that for a second, because if you just take a step back and have a squiz at this thing from almost any angle, it's a bloody stunning looking car, I'll tell you that, especially in XR6 trim. And that's an amazing achievement when you consider this thing is nearly 20 years old. Now, if I'm honest with you, I actually own the previous generation Falcon, which came before this, the AU Falcon. And that is a car that really was received very poorly upon launch back in 1998. But time really has proven just how tough, how strong, how well designed that car actually was. But for a car that was based on the AU Falcon and used that vehicle as a starting point, it is amazing just how different the BA Falcon feels. I think it feels different in almost every aspect. And please make sure you subscribe, because I will be putting both of those cars head to head in the near future. But for now, I can tell you that the AU Falcon to me kind of feels more closely related to the E-Series Falcons of the 1990s, whereas the BA was kind of the beginning of a new generation. It was really out with the old and in with the new. But with cars, as you'll find out, that is not always a good thing. So let's say you found yourself at a Ford dealership back in 2002 with a stupid grin on your face and a wallet full of cash. What exactly could you get for your money? Well, first up, you've got your Falcon XT, which is the base model in the BA Falcon range. Used to be called the Forte, it used to be called the GLI, and then the GL back in the early 1990s. The XT badge may have sounded a little bit more fancy, but make no mistake, this is legitimate tie-task transport. The XT came standard with air conditioning, power windows in the front, and that was about it. But if you were also batshit crazy, you could option a 5.4 litre V8 engine, because if you're buying a base model car and you're looking to save money, why the hell not? The Falcon XT is your $4.95 Domino's pepperoni pizza. Incredibly satisfying and cheaper than you would expect. And also, if you don't finish it in one sitting, it reheats incredibly well the next morning. Next up, you had your Falcon Futura, which is kind of like the XT, except it isn't wearing pluggers or a wife beater anymore. Your Futura was really for families and gained bonus features like cruise control, alloy wheels, power windows in the back for your little sprogs, and lots of colour coordinated bits and bobs around the bodywork. The Futura is kind of like a Costco barbecue chicken, providing for the entire family and still at a reasonable price. Good on ya. But because Australians always like sport, you had your Falcon XR6 for the sporty edge. Except it came with exactly the same engine as the previous two cars. But hey, at least it looks sporty, and it also came with slightly lowered sport suspension. But at the very least, there were some spicier engine upgrades available on the XR range. But you'll have to hold your horses, because I'll tell you all about it coming up soon. But as you'll find out soon, the XR range is your zinger bacon and cheese combo from KFC, when you just need a little bit of alone time with something that'll blow your head off. Not a shotgun, the burger. Next up, you have your BA Fairmont, which was the entry-level luxury car in the BA Falcon range. And you can tell it's luxury because Ford gets the Falcon name and then throws it straight in the bin. And the Fairmont was fancy. It's got some new alloy wheels, it's got a different grille, it's got some chrome, it's got dual zone climate control, it's got traction control, it's got footwell lamps, it had a full velour interior with lots of wood grain and also an analog clock, because it doesn't get any more luxurious than that. The Fairmont is your grilled crispy bacon and cheeseburger with chips. Knife and fork, you're getting fancy now, mate. Hey? And lastly, you've got your fancy as fuck BA Fairmont gear. And I had one of these things in AU spec, and they are a really nice thing. And they came with pretty much every single thing I've already mentioned. But in addition, they also had a premium sound system, leather seats, and reversing sensors as standard. And that's why your Fairmont gear is quite simply your hog's breath, choice cut rump steak with curly fries and sweet potatoes on the side. When you want to go out on the town in your fanciest shirt, but not come home with your wallet on fire. And like any Falcon, you could get some of these models in a station wagon body or even a ute with a style side tub or a cab chassis. Now the BA Falcon I've got here is of course the XR6, which is your full zinger bacon and cheese combo from KFC. Except mine is packing something a little bit extra. It's been upsized. So give me about 10 minutes, would ya? And I'll tell you all about it. Now, as an AU Falcon owner, buying a BA was a bit of a shock. Because as I mentioned, this car feels completely different for something which is based on an AU Falcon. I thought it was really just going to be a reskin, but definitely they feel completely different. My favourite part about this car was probably the seats. They were called sports leather and they were an optional extra back in the day, but whoever optioned those seats, I tell you what, they made a really good choice because they have really nice leather bolstering which holds you perfectly to the seat. And they also have a bumpy suede surface which grabs me in ways that I didn't think was possible. The dashboard as well has also been completely reworked. If you got the XR6 like this one, you got this dash cluster with this awesome blue and red lighting. It looks really sporty, and at night, it's just incredible. And the steering wheel, the gear shifter, and also all the other touch points just feel completely right. You can get yourself into a really comfortable driving position and just knock out the kilometers, one after the other. One thing that is interesting though, that I think is actually kind of funny, is the dash material. It looks okay, you know, not offensive in any way, but when you start poking it, the whole thing kind of moves like it's organic. Not just the top material, it's the whole substrate kind of pushes in as if you're prodding the skin of a hippopotamus. Let's hope there's no blood or organs hidden in behind it. But otherwise, it's your typical Falcon. It's big, it's comfortable, it's everything I think anyone could ever want in a car. It's a shame that the SUV craze killed these things off later on. Now look, I'm not the healthiest person. I am rocking a dad bod. I think I do it all right. but I would not take this back for anything. I think as far as fast food goes, you can't beat it. That was stunning. So let's hit the road in the old BA Falcon XR6 and I'll tell you more about it. Now for the BA Falcon range, Ford Australia actually released a brand new engine called the Barra 182. And as the name suggests, it is a 182 kilowatt, 4 litre straight six with double overhead cams, 4 valves per cylinder and variable valve timing. And it was a pretty good thing and quite a step up from the 4 litre single overhead cam which was found back in the AU Falcon. Comparing base model cars like for like, it was a 25 kilowatt jump in power, which is fairly substantial. Now, both of these engines are of course unique to Ford Australia and you're not going to find them anywhere else in the world. But the engines of course do trace their way back to the 1960s where we started developing the 4 litre straight six engine based on the American 144 cubic inch straight six. We of course made it a lot better over the years and when the Americans dropped it, we stuck with it. So we did the right thing and really it is an amazing engine, I have to say. Now, one thing that wasn't new about the BA Falcon was actually the gearbox selection. In the base model car, it came with a BTR 4-speed automatic transmission. It's the exact same one found in the AU. And it really didn't do the car any favours when it came to pick up off the line because they are famous for having incredibly tall first gears. If you wanted something a little bit more sporty though, you could option a Borg Warner T5 manual, and again, it's the same box found in the AU. But really, neither of these gearboxes were considered to be cutting edge back in the day. And really, the Falcon, and also the Commodore for that matter, which also had similar options for gearboxes, they really were starting to lag behind the Japanese and also the European and especially the German manufacturers when it came to sports sedans. It's a nice BA Ute going the other way. There's still a lot of these cars around, just like the AUs. Now, right up until the BA Falcon's introduction, Ford Australia had always leaned on their high-performance arm, which was called Tickford Vehicle Engineering, to sort of hot up their everyday Falcons and turn them into something more sporty. They of course created the XR6 and also the XR8 back in 1991 or 92. But really, their 6-cylinder engines, even though they were sort of high-performance variants, they never set the world on fire because Tickford, in a way, to me, they always felt a little bit hamstrung because, yes, they did hot up the Falcon suspension and they really did an awesome job of making everyday sort of family sedans handle like, not a sports car, but definitely a sports sedan. And of course they as well had some really cool body kits as well to make your Falcon look a lot more sporty visually compared to the boring base model cars. But one thing that they were really limited with were the engines. So when you look at the sportiest AU Falcon you could buy in 6-cylinder form, which was the XR6 VCT, it came out packing just 172 kilowatts, just 15 kilowatts more than the base model Forte with its ridiculous plastic hubcaps. I don't know if it was Ford trying to keep Tickford in check, but Tickford really they're only limiting their modifications to a revised cylinder head and also the variable cam timing in an effort to try and increase low-down power and also high-end power, switching cam profiles. So yeah, it's pretty ridiculous when you think about it. You're paying all this money for a sporty 6-cylinder Falcon and it's not really any faster than a base model car. 15 kilowatts, that was it.
But for the BA Falcon, Ford Australia had a secret weapon hidden up their sleeve. Their Tickford High Performance division became FPV, Ford Performance Vehicles, and FPV's small team of engineers built an engine that would go on to change the Australian automotive landscape forever. The team at FPV strapped a turbo to the side of the Barra to create the Barra 240T, a 4-litre force-fed powerhouse. An engine that blew competing V8s out of the water, and one that is still sending shockwaves around the world almost 20 years later. A 4-litre 24-valve double overhead cam Turbo 6, producing 240 kilowatts of power and 450 newton meters of torque, and they achieved these figures with just 6 pounds of boost from a Garrett GT3540 turbocharger. The regular Barra may have been named after the barramundi sportfish, but the team at FPV gave the Barra Turbo a nickname all of its own. They called it Gull, as in seagull, because even back then they already knew that it was going to shit on absolutely everything.
And it pretty much went on to do exactly that by promptly murdering Holden's L67 supercharged Ecotec 3.8 litre 6, and also arguably their 5.7 litre LS1 V8 engine. And the Barra Turbo also cannibalised Ford's own 5.4 litre modular V8 powered XR8 Falcon sedan and ute as well. On paper, the V8s have more power, but in reality, you have to rev them higher to actually get it. Whereas a 4-litre Barra Turbo like this one has a nice fat slab of torque from just 2,000 RPM upwards. But it spools up early and it pins you to the back of your seat throughout almost the entire rev range, making this engine feel a lot larger than it actually is.
But if you wanted something larger, you could always step up to an XR8, powered by Ford's 5.4 litre modular V8 engine. And let's not forget about FPV's own homegrown high-performance models, the range-topping GT and GTP, and the Pursuit Ute, all powered by the Boss 290, throwing out 290 kilowatts of power and 520 newton meters of torque. And then in 2004 they were also joined by the F6 Typhoon sedan and the F6 Tornado Ute, both packing the mightiest Barra Turbo of them all, the blue top 270 kilowatt Barra 270T. And whilst the V8s still win on power, the 6s grabbed the headlines of the day, offering V8 levels of performance in an exciting new turbo package, quite unlike anything we'd ever seen before.
When this engine hit the market back in 2002, Holden didn't have an answer for it. And 15 years later, when Holden stopped building the Commodore in Australia altogether, they still did not have an answer for this engine. That is how amazing the Barra Turbo was and still is today. And it's all thanks to a crack team of engineers at FPV and a very understanding parent company, Ford Australia. And it's even more amazing because this is just where the story started. It actually finished in the FGX XR6 Sprint in 2016, where the Barra 325T was throwing out, you guessed it, 325 kilowatts of power and 576 newton meters of torque. All of that from an Australian design engine in an Australian design car from the factory with a factory warranty. Now, over time, the Barra Turbo has proven itself to be an extremely robust engine. But still, the one here, the 240T and the BA XR6 Turbo, is known for having comparatively skinny connecting rods. Also, you can shatter the oil pump gears if you regularly bounce this thing off the rev limiter. And also, the valve springs are known to start floating at around 15 psi. But still, we're only finding out about these limitations because this engine has so much untapped tuning potential in the first place. And people who are looking to turn up the wick on their engines can do so relatively easily, with 300 kilowatts of the wheels being easily achievable with some basic bolt-on modifications, an intercooler, valve springs, injectors, and upping the boost. So make sure you're subscribed for that one. But none of this really is necessary when you're being honest about it, because in stock standard trim, the Barra 240T still has enough power to tear your nuts off. Now, back in the day, I actually drove a BA Falcon with the Barra 182, the naturally aspirated Barra, and I had zero complaints as to how that car drove. It was really fantastic, lots of power, lots of torque. Even when you're at 100 k's an hour or just under and you're trying to overtake someone, plenty of power. It was always punchy, it was always strong, sounded good, and I loved it. But really, the Barra Turbo, it's a completely different beast. thing that really surprised me the most with this car is how it performs under partial throttle. So here we are, we're doing 60 in an 80k zone. And if I just put my foot down a little bit, probably like quarter throttle, not even half throttle, it'll sort of go for a bit and then it just suddenly picks up. Here we go now. All of a sudden, the turbo comes on boost and then you're just being hurled towards the horizon. It is absolutely astonishing, and it's one of my favorite things about this car. You've got all this muscle under the bonnet and it's not always apparent. You know, you just put in little throttle inputs, it'll feel nice and smooth, a little bit doughy. But when you need the power, shit, it comes on hard. And most of the time you just hear this thing sucking in air like a vacuum cleaner as you go along. And I do like that noise quite a lot, but I would like to get an upgraded exhaust for this car. So as I mentioned, make sure you're subscribed because we'll be doing it. You betcha. So here we are going from 80 to 100. We'll drop it back to third. Punch it on. Nothing, everything. Whoa. Yeah. Awesome. There's no other words for it. So as you'd expect, the engine really is the star of this car. It's why the values of these cars have also gone through the roof at the moment. I picked this thing up for under 10,000, but now they are well over 10,000, even for good condition BA XR6 turbos like this one. Later models like the BF, FG, FGX, they're even higher. They're just out of control when it comes to demand and also the pricing based on that demand. Especially since the big C hit around the world. We're doing okay here in Queensland, but I think it's given people time to consider what they really want out of life. And a lot of people have decided, hey, I'd love an Australian-made sedan in my garage. So it's kind of lucky I got in when I did, because trying to pick up one of these now, it was hard back then, it's even harder now. So yeah, you give it a bit of throttle. Whoa. I was only probably less than half and we're already up to the speed limit. And it sounded good getting there as well. So what can I say aside from the engine? Well, this is actually a 2004 model XR6 Turbo, and in October 2004 they switched across to the BA Falcon Mark II. Now I think there were some minor improvements they made to the car all round, probably different trim and things like that, but one of the biggest changes came if you optioned a manual gearbox, which as you can see, this one is a manual, and what it is actually a T56 6-speed manual gearbox. Now the Tremec T56 first appeared in the Dodge Viper back in the 90s, and it appeared in various different cars throughout the years. I'll put a list on the screen, I don't remember them off the top of my head, but it is a pretty well-known, pretty hard-wearing gearbox. So I do really love the 6-speed manual. It's nice to have a large assortment of ratios to choose from. It is fairly aggressively geared, so you can get a really savage takeoff. There's always a gear when you need it. It's going to suit what you're doing. And it does make it satisfying when you're sort of out on these country roads like this one. But the cool thing about it is you don't have to do that because the engine has such a wide band of torque. You don't really need to shift gears if you don't want to. You can sort of whack it in 4th or 5th depending on the speed you're doing, and you can just putt along because it's always got power there when you need it. This is a pretty standard road in Australia when you get any more than say 30 or 40 Ks from any capital city. This car does handle brilliantly, and it's also fairly soft and compliant in its ride. It definitely is a little bit on the sporty side, and you do sort of get jiggled about a little bit if the road's rough, but that's kind of coming with the territory, I guess. When you've got this much power in a car, you want some sport suspension to sort of back it up. So when you are sort of throwing it through some of the turns, the car's going to stay planted, it's going to stay flat, and you're going to power your way through the corner as expected. You don't want it wallowing around. It is incredibly comfortable still, all things considered, but it does have that kind of sporty, slightly firm edge to it. And when you're on roads like this, when I've been driving other cars, it is fairly common when you're driving at speed that the suspension might bottom out and hit the bump stops with a bit of a thud. You know, a lot of newer cars, because they are a little bit lower these days, do have that problem. But this thing, it's been solid the entire time. I've owned this car for probably about 8 or 9 months. I've never hit the bump stops any time at all when driving at speed on these rough old roads. So yeah, they've really nailed the suspension tune. BA Falcon as well is of course the first Falcon released which came standard across every single model with independent rear suspension. And it's called Control Blade IRS, and it's a pretty good system. Apparently it's a bit dumbed down compared to the IRS on the AU Falcon. I'm sure in the luxury models like the FAIRMONT and things like that, you probably could notice the difference. But in the XR6 Turbo I've got here, I really do love the independent rear suspension. It seems to do a really good job, it's comfortable. But if you want to talk about the BA Falcon, you of course have to talk about its problems as well. Seeing as this was pretty much a brand new model, they've done a lot of things, they've tried a lot of things with this model. There were its fair share of problems, which only became apparent as time went on. And I have to say, since I've owned this car, I've had to do a lot of maintenance to fix a lot of niggly little problems, especially with how the engine runs. And I can't say I've really had to do anywhere near as much on my AU. It definitely seems to be the more robust car compared to the BA. But yes, the BA Falcon is pretty famous for its issues, which pretty much every single car will develop over its lifetime. The first of which being that rear diff that I was talking about. The bushings in the rear diff are famous for flogging out around 100,000 Ks, so you have to replace them. Center bearings on the prop shaft are also something that wear out with time, and ball joints on the front especially are known for failing fairly prematurely and fairly spectacularly. But look, you name a car which doesn't have problems when it gets to over 100,000 Ks. Pretty much every single car on the market will have some kind of fairly well-known problem, because try as they might, manufacturers will try and build the best car they can for the money. But humans aren't perfect, and neither are the cars, especially Aussie cars. Pretty much every single Australian car, you can name a model, it's got a famous problem or two, which every single one is going to develop. But that's all kind of part and parcel of, it's not classic car, but sort of old car ownership, I guess. These things, as I mentioned, are approaching 20 years old. They're not new. This one being fairly low Ks, 126,000 kilometers, does feel fairly new, but you've got to remind yourself it is nearly 20 years old. I often can't believe that myself because I remember when these things came out. But yes, they are old cars. You've got to look after them. You've got to get them checked. You've got to work on them if you want to. But I kind of enjoy that. I like going out into the garage on a weekend, spending a couple of hours tinkering. There are a lot of jobs you can handle yourself if you have the confidence, if you have the tools. These are really awesome old cars to work on. They're relatively simple with their straight six engine, lots of space down each side to get it whatever you need to get at. And I am really in love with them. I just think they're fantastic, and I really do miss the fact that we stopped building them. Almost 5 years ago to this year, Ford stopped building them in Victoria, and Holden shut up shop a year later. So it really is a shame, but when you think about it, it is amazing that they hung on as long as they did, because here are two companies that were building cars for a market of only 25 million people. And that's crazy, because you think about the R&D costs involved in designing a new car. I think with the BA, Ford spent around $500 million essentially fixing the AU, facelifting it, and designing and building the BA. And that is a crazy amount of money when you consider they're only selling probably 60,000 cars per year. That is an incredibly small amount, and I don't know how many they would have needed to sell just to break even, but it probably would have been 30 or 40,000 cars. So when you're talking about the amount of profit you can make by designing, building, selling cars only in Australia, and of course New Zealand and maybe some other minor markets, it's pretty crazy what they did, and you absolutely have to admire them for what they were able to produce with not a lot of outside help. So really, that is why I think these cars are amazing. You've got to appreciate them for what they are. They're not perfect, but neither are we. None of us are perfect. Me and the BA Falcon were out on a cruise today, and it's just me and him, and he's doing a great job. I absolutely love the shit out of him. He's a great car. He doesn't have a name. He or she, I don't know. Them or they. It's 2021, things are changing. But yes, I love this car. I think it is fantastic. For the price I paid for it, it's a bargain. Even for the price they go for today, I think they are a bargain. People think that once the big C has been taken care of with vaccinations, that the prices are going to go down. I personally do not think they are. I think they're still cheap cars for what they can do, what they are capable of. They're just amazing. So if you can pick up one of these cars, if you have the ways and means to do it, don't hesitate, do it today. I guarantee you're going to have the time of your life. With the benefit of nearly 20 years of hindsight, some people may look back on the BA Falcon and see it as the inferior Barra. They'll tell you that Ford Australia rushed the BA to market to replace the disaster that was the AU, and that you should probably buy a BF, FG or even FGX Falcon instead, because after all, they're the more refined, more robust vehicles. And from a technical standpoint, that is completely true. But if you're talking about important Australian cars from the last 20 or 30 years or so, cars which changed the Australian automotive landscape as we know it, I would argue that the BA Falcon should sit right at the top of a very short list of cars. And even if it's true, if Ford Australia had to rush the BA Falcon's development to replace the AU, what they achieved with the time they had, I think it is absolutely incredible. You know, sometimes the greatest things are achieved when faced with overwhelming adversity. To me then, the BA Falcon marks a point in time when Ford Australia, I think, were at their peak. The cars weren't perfect, they never were, but it does represent a time when they got so many things right. Beautiful styling, solid engineering, built by good old-fashioned Aussie know-how. Winning races on Sunday and then selling rocket ships like this XR6 Turbo here on Monday. When it comes to Australian cars, it doesn't really get much better than that.